2:17 a.m.
The time glowed on the face of a watch worth more than the car he was currently dismantling with his thoughts. Kenji Tanaka sat in the penthouse overlooking a sleeping Tokyo, the city's glittering veins of light a map of his own dominion. The air was sterile, tasting of polished glass and old whiskey. He was a man carved from silence and control, his empire built on the unspoken threat in a perfectly tailored suit. But the silence was a liar. Inside his chest, a hollow echo remained, a space once occupied by the sound of her laughter, a sound he had foolishly traded for absolute power. Then his phone vibrated against the granite countertop, a single, insistent buzz that was not on his schedule. It was a private line, a ghost number only one person outside his circle still possessed. His heart constricted, a fist of ice closing around the organ. He never expected her to use it. He had ensured she wouldn't need to, setting up a life for her far from his own, a life of quiet safety bought with his blood and secrets. He saw her name, Lena, and the world tilted on its axis. He answered before the second vibration could begin. Kenji. Her voice was a frayed thread, stretched thin by pain and exhaustion. It was not the voice he remembered, the one that was rich with warmth and teasing humor. This was the sound of a person at their breaking point. I'm sorry to call. His own voice was rough, a tool rusted from disuse in the language of vulnerability. Where are you?
No preamble.
No questions about the 2 years of silence between them, his entire being narrowed to that single point of focus. Her location, her safety. St. Jude's, she breathed, a gasp of pain cutting through her words.
Downtown.
He left. Marcus is gone. And I'm... Another sharp intake of breath, a sound of profound, physical agony that shot through the phone and into Kenji's bones. I'm having a baby, Kenji.
Right now.
And I'm alone, the words did not compute. A baby. His mind, a finely tuned machine for strategy and violence, stalled. The schematic of the city below blurred into a meaningless smear of light. A baby. The hollow space inside him suddenly felt vast, an abyss. Alone. The word was a blade, twisting in a wound he didn't know he still carried. He was on his feet before the thought was complete, his body moving with the lethal grace that kept his enemies awake at night.
Keys.
Wallet. The cold weight of the custom pistol he slid into the back of his waistband was an old, familiar comfort against the terrifying newness of this feeling. I'm coming, he said, the words a vow forged in the sudden fire of his pulse. Don't be alone. I'm already on my way. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital was an assault. It was a place of weakness, of life and death decided by machines and strangers, a world completely alien to his own where outcomes were dictated by will and force. Kenji moved through the fluorescent-lit corridors like a phantom, his dark suit absorbing the light, his presence a stark anomaly among the tired-looking families and harried nurses. He found a room, the number she'd given him etched onto a small plaque. He paused at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. For 2 years, he had been the Oyabun of the Tanakagumi, a man whose name was a whisper of fear and respect. Now, standing outside this door, he was just a man who had let the most important thing in his life walk away. He pushed the door open. Lena was in the bed, her beautiful face strained, her skin glistening with a sheen of sweat. Her eyes, usually the color of warm honey, were wide with a mixture of pain and a fear so profound it made his own blood run cold. A young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a fiercely protective stance stood beside the bed, holding Lena's hand. She looked up as he entered, her gaze instantly hostile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low and challenging. "Brielle, it's okay." Lena managed, her voice weak. "This is Kenji." Brielle's eyes narrowed further, scanning him from head to toe, taking in the expensive suit, the controlled stillness, the unmistakable aura of danger that clung to him like cologne. Her expression made it clear she was not impressed. "This is the guy," she muttered, just loud enough for him to hear. Kenji ignored her, his entire focus on Lena. He crossed the room in 3 silent strides, his gaze locked on hers. The silence between them stretched, thick with everything left unsaid, with the ghost of a future they had planned and he had destroyed. "You look," he started, his voice failing him. "Beautiful, even like this. Terrified. Strong. You're here," he finished lamely. She gave a weak, watery smile that broke his heart all over again. I didn't know who else to call. A contraction seized her, and her body arched, a cry of pure agony escaping her lips. Brielle was there instantly, murmuring encouragement. Kenji stood frozen, a monolith of useless power. He could topple governments, but he couldn't take away a fraction of her pain. He saw the four in her arm, the monitors beeping a frantic rhythm, and the stark reality of her situation crashed down on him. She was here, having a baby she said was his, and another man had abandoned her. The thought of this Marcus sent a surge of cold, precise rage through him, a familiar fire he had to consciously bank. It had no place here.
Not now.
He reached out, his hand hesitating before he gently brushed a stray curl from her damp forehead.
His touch was tentative, a question.
She leaned into it, just for a second, her eyes closing. In that small gesture, a universe of forgiveness and desperate need was conveyed. "I'm here now," he whispered, the promise tasting like ash and redemption in his mouth. "I'm not leaving." The hours that followed were a blur of controlled chaos. Nurses came and went, their voices a calm, professional drone against the rising tide of Lena's pain. Brielle remained a vigilant guardian, her suspicion of Kenji a palpable force field around the bed. But as the night wore on and the contractions intensified, even she had to concede his presence was a steadying one. He didn't speak much. He simply stood, a silent anchor in the storm, his eyes never leaving Lena. He procured water, cool cloths for her forehead, and when a particularly violent wave of pain racked her body, his hand found hers, his grip firm and unwavering. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his, her strength a testament to the fire he had always admired in her. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and an air of unflappable competence, eventually announced it was time. The world narrowed to the confines of that room. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors, the doctor's calm instructions, Lena's ragged breathing, it was a symphony of impending life. Kenji felt a primal fear he hadn't experienced since his first kill, a terror that was not for himself, but for her, for this tiny, unknown life she was fighting to bring into the world. He was at her side, one hand holding hers, the other stroking her hair. "Breathe with me, Lena," he found himself saying, his voice a low murmur against her ear. "Just like we practiced for your presentations. Inhale calm, exhale noise." It was a memory from another life, a simpler time when her biggest worry was a boardroom pitch, and his was keeping his two worlds from colliding. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. She focused on his eyes, her own filled with a desperate trust that humbled him. She followed his lead, her breathing evening out, her focus sharpening. He became her focal point, the unmoving center of her universe, as she did the hardest work of her life. And then, with a final, soul-shattering cry, it was over. A new sound filled the room, thin, reedy, but utterly magnificent. The cry of a newborn. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, her smile radiant.
À son. Kenji est son.
The nurse cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blue blanket before placing him in Lena's waiting arms. Lena looked down at the tiny, perfect face, and a wave of such pure, unadulterated love washed over her features that it took Kenji's breath away. Tears streamed down her cheeks, washing away the lines of pain. She looked up at Kenji, her eyes shining. "He's perfect," she whispered. Kenji reached out a hesitant finger, his hand trembling slightly as he touched the baby's soft cheek. The infant turned towards his touch instinctively. In that moment, the entire brutal, violent architecture of Kenji's life crumbled to dust. His empire of shadows, his throne of fear, it was all meaningless. This was real. This small, fragile life. This woman who had brought him into the world. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to Lena's forehead, his lips lingering. "You are incredible," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "We have a son, Lena," and in the quiet finality of those words, a new vow was silently forged. This boy would never know the world his father came from. He would be protected, he would be safe, and he would be loved. Kenji would burn his own kingdom to the ground to make it so. The harsh fluorescent lights of the delivery room had been replaced by the soft, warm glow of a lamp in a private recovery suite. Kenji had arranged it with a single, quiet phone call. Money was a vulgar tool, but it was effective. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, there was a fragile peace. Brielle had finally departed after giving Kenji one last, warning glare that promised retribution if he hurt Lena again. Now it was just the three of them. Lena was asleep, her exhaustion absolute. In her arms, cradled against her chest, their son slept too, his tiny face a mask of serene innocence. Kenji sat in a chair by the window, not watching the city, but watching them. He had never felt such a profound sense of purpose. Every instinct, every violent capability he possessed, had reoriented itself around the two people in that bed. They were his new true north. He named the boy Kai in his mind, a name that meant ocean and restoration. It felt right. He watched the gentle rise and fall of Kai's chest, the tiny, jerky movements he made in his sleep. A feeling of overwhelming tenderness washed over him, so potent it was almost painful. This was his son. His legacy was no longer in buildings and territories, but in this small, perfect human being. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket, a low, insistent hum. He pulled it out, annoyed at the intrusion. It was a secure message from Rio, his second-in-command. The message was short, stripped of all pleasantries. "Ishikawa is moving. He knows about the hospital. He thinks she has leverage." The words hit Kenji like a physical blow. The fragile piece of the room shattered into a million pieces. Ishikawa. A rival from the old guard, a man who saw Kenji's more modern, business-like approach as a weakness. A man who dealt in cruelty and thrived on chaos. And he knew about Lena. The warmth in the room turned to ice. Kenji's vision narrowed, the protective tenderness of a new father instantly transmuting into the cold, lethal fury of the Oyabun. He looked at Lena, her face so peaceful in sleep, and at Kai, so blissfully unaware of the predators that circled their world. Ishikawa saw them as leverage.
A tool.
A weakness to be exploited. A low growl rumbled in Kenji's chest. He would learn. Kenji would teach him personally what a fatal miscalculation he had just made. He stood up, his movements silent and precise. He walked to the bed and gently brushed a kiss against Lena's temple, careful not to wake her. "I will keep you safe," he whispered, the promise a deadly covenant. He pulled his phone back out and typed a reply to Rio, his thumbs moving with cold efficiency. "Prepare the residence. Full security protocol. No one in or out without my authorization. I am moving them in 1 hour." He then made a second call, this one to the hospital administrator he had spoken to earlier. There was no negotiation in his tone, only the calm, unshakable weight of command. He was moving his family, and the world would rearrange itself to accommodate him. The quiet moment of intimacy was over. The external threat had arrived, and the protector was now fully awake. The transition from the hospital to the penthouse was executed with the silent, seamless efficiency of a military operation. Rio had arranged for a private ambulance and a security detail that materialized and vanished like ghosts, ensuring no one saw them leave. The penthouse was not Kenji's primary residence, which was too well known, too much a symbol of his power. This place was different. It was a sanctuary he had purchased years ago, a place he'd imagined, in a foolish moment of hope, might one day be a home. It had floor-to-ceiling windows with a breathtaking view of the city, but the glass was bulletproof. The decor was modern and warm, filled with soft fabrics and clean lines, a deliberate contrast to the cold steel and shadows of his other life. It was a fortress disguised as a home. Lena was quiet during the move, her exhaustion mixed with a dawning awareness of the reality she had stepped back into by calling him. As he settled her into the master suite, the king-sized bed dwarfing her. She finally spoke, her voice laced with fear. "Kenji, what's happening? Why all this?" She clutched Kai closer to her chest, her body a shield. He knelt by the bed, taking her hand. He would not lie to her. Not anymore. "There is a threat," he said, his voice level. "An old rival. He found out you were at the hospital. He is a man who sees people as pawns." Her eyes widened, the fear sharpening into something more acute. "Because of you," she whispered. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. A fact that had ended their engagement 2 years ago. "Yes," he admitted, the word tasting like failure. "Because of me. But I will handle it. No one will ever touch you or our son. I swear this on my life, Lena." He saw the conflict in her eyes. The woman who loved him warring with the mother who had to protect her child. "This is what I ran from, Kenji," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't raise him like this. Looking over my shoulder, living in a gilded cage, waiting for the other shoe to drop." He understood completely. He had wanted the same for her, which is why he had let her go, breaking both their hearts in the process. But now, the equation had changed. The threat had found her anyway. His protection was no longer a cage, but a necessity. "This is temporary," he promised, his grip on her hand tightening. "This is a problem I failed to eliminate from my past. I will eliminate it now. And then, we will talk about the future." A different future. He explained what little he knew about Marcus, the man who had abandoned her. She confessed he had seemed perfect at first, charming and stable, but had grown cold and distant when he learned of the pregnancy, finally vanishing a week ago, leaving her with nothing. Kenji filed the man's name away. He was another loose thread to be dealt with later. But for now, the primary threat was Ishikawa. "Trust me, Lena," he said, his gaze intense. "Let me fix this. Let me earn the right to be his father. To be with you." She searched his face, looking for the man she had fallen in love with beneath the hardened mask of the oyabun. After a long moment, she gave a slow, hesitant nod. It wasn't absolution, but it was a chance.
And it was more than he deserved.
Rio arrived an hour later, a slim data slate in his hand. He bowed respectfully as Kenji met him in the living area, far from the master suite where Lena and Kai were resting. Rio was a man of few words and absolute loyalty, his face an impassive mask that betrayed nothing of the violent world he helped manage. "Ishikawa-san is making a play for the port contracts," Rio began without preamble, his voice a low monotone. "He believes you have been softened by your time away from the front lines, focusing on legitimate enterprises. He sees this as an opportunity." Kenji stared out at the city lights. "Softened," he repeated, the word a dry, humorless rasp. "And the woman?" "My son." "He is using them as a narrative," Rio explained, pulling up a file on the slate. It showed surveillance photos, blurry but unmistakable, of Kenji entering the hospital. "He is spreading whispers to the other families. That the great Tanaka-sama has a weakness. That his attention is divided. He intends to use this perceived vulnerability to force a vote of no confidence at the next council meeting." Kenji felt a familiar, cold clarity settle over him. This wasn't just a random act of aggression. It was a calculated political move. Ishikawa was using the most precious thing in Kenji's world as a piece in a boardroom game, reframing Kenji's act of love and responsibility as a fatal flaw. It also reframed the past. The danger that had driven Lena away wasn't just a generic risk of his lifestyle. It was the direct result of men like Ishikawa, men who refused to evolve, who still believed power grew only from the barrel of a gun and the fear in a person's eyes. His decision 2 years ago to let Lena go had been an attempt to quarantine her from this poison. But the poison had seeped through the walls anyway. The only solution wasn't to run from it, but to eradicate it at the source. "He believes I am distracted," Kenji said, turning from the window. A chillingly calm smile touched his lips, a sight that Rio knew preceded swift and terrible action. "He is mistaken. My focus has never been sharper. For years, Kenji had been trying to pivot the Tanakagumi, to launder its power into legitimacy, to build something that would last beyond violence. Ishikawa was the anchor to the old ways, a constant reminder of the bloody pit he was trying to climb out of. He has forced my hand, Kenji continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He wanted to show the council my weakness. Instead, I will show them my strength. A new kind of strength. Ryo waited, his posture attentive. What are your orders, Oyabun? Kenji's gaze was distant, already mapping out the moves on a chessboard only he could see. Arrange a meeting. Just Ishikawa and me. At the old warehouse by the docks. His territory. Make him feel secure. Ryo's eyebrow twitched, the only sign of his surprise. Alone, sir? He thinks I am a man who brings an army, Kenji said. I am going to show him that I am the army. This would not be a war of bullets and bodies. It would be a quiet, precise dismantling. He would not become the monster Ishikawa expected him to be. He would become something far more terrifying, a man with everything to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. The air in the warehouse was thick with the smell of rust and salt water. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. Ishikawa sat behind a metal desk, flanked by 4 of his largest men, their ill-fitting suits failing to conceal the bulges of firearms. He was a relic, a man whose face was a roadmap of old grudges and petty cruelties. He smirked as Kenji entered, alone, his hands empty. Tanaka-sama, Ishikawa said, his voice oozing false deference. An honor. I did not expect you to come unaccompanied. Have you grown sentimental in your old age? Kenji stopped 10 feet from the desk, his posture relaxed, his presence filling the cavernous space. I came to deliver a message, Ishikawa. It is a private one, and she gave a pointed look at Ishikawa's men. Ishikawa laughed, a harsh, grating sound. My men stay. A man with a new family must be cautious. No? A beautiful woman, I hear.
Assent.
Such fragile things, the threat was laid bare. Ugly and direct. Kenji's expression did not change, but a wintry cold emanated from him. He slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out not a weapon, but a data slate, the twin of Ryo's. He tossed it onto the desk. It slid to a stop in front of Ishikawa. What is this? A business proposal? Ishikawa sneered. A retirement package, Kenji said softly. Ishikawa's smirk faltered. He picked up the slate and activated it. The screen lit up with encrypted financial records. Bank transfers from Ishikawa's accounts to a shell corporation, which then paid off 2 key members of the harbormaster's office. It was evidence of a skimming operation Ishikawa had been running for years, stealing from the very families he now sought to lead. This is fabricated, Ishikawa snarled, but the sweat beading on his forehead told a different story. Is it? Kenji asked calmly. The next file contains a recording. Your voice, Ishikawa, negotiating with the head of the Chinese triads to allow their narcotics to move through our port in exchange for a cut. A direct violation of the council's oldest treaty. Ishikawa's face went pale. His men shifted uneasily. And the last file, Kenji continued, his voice dropping lower, colder, is the most personal. It is the complete travel history, school schedule, and home address of your daughter, who is studying abroad in London. A lovely girl, the air crackled with tension. It was not a threat of violence against her. It was a demonstration of reach. A quiet statement that while Ishikawa was looking at Kenji's family, Kenji had already mapped out his entire world. The unspoken message was clear. I can touch anyone anywhere. And you never even saw me coming. Ishikawa stared at him, his bravado crumbling into raw fear. He had expected a gangster. He was facing an intelligence agency. What do you want? He finally choked out. You will call a meeting of the council tomorrow, Kenji stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will announce your immediate retirement for health reasons. You will cede control of your territories and assets to me, as a gesture of apology for your disloyalty. In return, this slate and all its copies will be destroyed, and your daughter will continue her studies in peace. He took a step forward, his shadow falling over the desk. You targeted my family to prove I was weak. You were wrong. My family is the reason I will no longer tolerate parasites like you in my garden. This is not a negotiation, Ishikawa stared, defeated. The controlled dominance was absolute. Kenji had won without a single drop of blood being spilled, proving a point far more profound than any violent reprisal could. He had shown them all that true power wasn't in the fist, it was in the mind. Kenji returned to the penthouse as the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and rose. He was not splattered with blood or smelling of cordite, but he felt as though he had just fought the most important battle of his life. He was exhausted, but it was a clean exhaustion, the feeling of a surgeon after a long and successful operation. He found Lena awake, sitting in an armchair by the window, Kai sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face for any sign of violence. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, shedding his jacket and loosening his tie, the armor of his old life. "It's over. He's gone." Retired, he walked over and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. They were warm. "I didn't hurt him," he said, needing her to know. "Not in the old way. I used information. Leverage. The way I should have been operating all along. I ended the threat to you." To Kai, without becoming the man you left, relief washed over her features, a wave so powerful it was almost visible. She had been bracing for the worst, for the return of the man whose knuckles were always bruised, whose eyes were always haunted. Instead, the man before her looked tired, but clear. The haunting was gone. "You promised me a different future," she said, her voice gaining strength. "What does that look like, Kenji?" This was the real test. The battle with Ishikawa was merely tactical. This was the negotiation for his soul. "It looks like this," he said, his voice earnest. "I'm selling my remaining territories. I'm liquidating the assets that are tied to the old ways. I've spent years building a legitimate corporate empire, and now it will be my only focus. It will be enough." More than enough, he paused, his thumbs tracing circles on the back of her hands. "It looks like a home, not a safe house. A place with a garden. A place where our son can play without bodyguards watching from the shadows. It looks like..." Normal, Lena's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of a fragile, burgeoning hope. "I don't know if I can trust that, Kenji. I want to, but I'm scared." "Then let me earn it," he pleaded softly. "Every day. I will spend the rest of my life earning back your trust." Earning the right to be Kai's father, he leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, closing his eyes. He could feel her breath on his lips, smell the faint, sweet scent of baby powder, and the unique fragrance that was just her. It was the scent of home. "I love you, Lena," he whispered, the words raw and honest. "I never stopped. Letting you go was the stupidest, most painful thing I have ever done." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she tilted her head and closed the small distance between them. Her lips met his, a soft, tentative press that was more question than statement. He responded with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, a kiss that held all the regret of the past 2 years and all the hope for the next 50. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. A silent agreement to begin again, to build something new from the ashes of their old life. When they broke apart, she rested her hand on his cheek. "Okay, Kenji," she whispered. "Okay, let's see our future." The next 6 months were a blur of calculated deconstruction and deliberate rebuilding. The montage of Kenji's transformation was not one of violence, but of paperwork. He was a whirlwind of motion, seen not in darkened alleys, but in sterile, glass-walled boardrooms. He met with lawyers, accountants, and brokers, his face a mask of grim determination. He methodically dismantled the criminal empire his father had built, selling off nightclubs, dissolving protection rackets, and severing ties with associates who could not or would not follow him into the light. Each sale was a surgical cut, severing a piece of his past. Rio, ever loyal, facilitated the transition, his strategic mind proving just as effective in corporate warfare as it had been in territorial disputes. There were moments of resistance. Old rivals and former allies saw his legitimacy as weakness, a betrayal. But the lesson of Ishikawa had spread through the underworld like wildfire. Kenji Tanaka was not weaker. He was more dangerous. His new weapons were contracts, loopholes, and the crushing weight of the legitimate legal system. He bled his opponents dry in the courts, not in the streets. His greatest test came in a quiet, formal tea house, where he met with the elders of the Yakuza Council, led by a fearsome, ancient man named Watanabe-sama, whose body was a tapestry of traditional Irezumi tattoos. They had summoned him to answer for the chaos his retirement had caused. Instead of defiance, Kenji offered respect. He bowed. He served the tea. And he made his case, not as a warlord, but as a father. "My time as Oyabun is over," he told them, his voice calm and steady. "My only concern now is my son's legacy. I am ceding the last of my traditional territories to this council as a sign of respect for the old ways. In return, I ask for a clean break. Let my new life be my own." Watanabe-sama watched him over the rim of his teacup, his ancient eyes missing nothing. He saw the change in Kenji, the absence of restless violence, replaced by a deep, grounded resolve. "A man's legacy is his son," the old man finally rasped. "You have chosen wisely. The council accepts your gift. Your past is now a ghost." It was the symbolic repayment, the final cut. He walked out of that tea house a free man. During this time, his life at the penthouse was a world away. He learned the rhythms of a newborn. He changed diapers, mastered the art of warming a bottle to the perfect temperature, and discovered that the sound of Kai's soft gurgles was more valuable than any stock portfolio. He would come home from a brutal day of negotiations, and the sight of Lena, rocking their son in her arms, would wash all the tension from his shoulders. He was not just a provider or a protector, he was a partner and a father. He and Lena talked for hours, rebuilding the bridge between them one conversation at a time. They were slow, careful steps, but they were always forward. The penthouse, once a symbol of his isolation, slowly became a real home, filled with the sounds and clutter of a new family. A year after that fateful 2 a.m. phone call, the penthouse was a memory. They lived in a house in a quiet, affluent suburb, a place with a sprawling backyard and a sturdy oak tree perfect for a future swing. There were no bulletproof windows, no hidden panic rooms. The only security was a standard alarm system and a golden retriever puppy currently chasing a butterfly across the lawn. The transformation was complete. Kenji's company, Tanaka Global, was a powerhouse in logistics and private security, fully legitimate and publicly traded. He wore the same tailored suits, but they felt different now. They were the uniform of a CEO, not a crime lord. Today was Kai's first birthday. The party was small and intimate. Brielle was there, her initial hostility towards Kenji having softened into a wary but genuine friendship after she'd witnessed his unwavering dedication to Lena and Kai. Rio was there too, looking slightly out of place in a casual shirt, holding a ridiculously oversized teddy bear. He was now the COO of Tanaka Global, his loyalty rewarded with a legitimate life he'd never thought possible. Lena moved through the party with an easy grace, her smile bright and genuine. She caught Kenji's eye from across the lawn, and the look that passed between them was one of deep, shared understanding. They had done it. They had built this. This quiet, beautiful, normal life. Later, after the guests had gone and Kai was asleep in his crib upstairs, Kenji and Lena sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. The puppy was asleep at their feet. "He had a good day," Lena said, leaning her head on Kenji's shoulder. "He has a good life," Kenji replied, his arm wrapping around her. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Because of you. You saved us, Lena." "You and him, we saved each other," she corrected softly. She turned to face him, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. The guardedness was long gone from her eyes, replaced by a love that was as deep and calm as the ocean. "I never thought this was possible. I would have burned the world for it," he said simply. "I almost did. I'm glad you didn't," she smiled. "I like this world better." He leaned in and kissed her a slow, lingering kiss filled with the comfortable intimacy of a shared life and the quiet passion of a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. It was a kiss of gratitude, of peace, of a future that stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. The ghost of his past would always be there, a faint scar to remind him of the man he used to be. But it no longer had power over him. His legacy was not in the shadows he had left behind, but in the light of the home he had built, with the family that had redeemed him.